Now, Vimalakirti is often put in there with this discussion of Prajna Paramita, because even though he's not directly a revelation or a public promulgation, could we say, of Nagarjuna, the character of his sutra is such that it's usually classified in that same way. Now, Nagarjuna takes Prajna Paramita sutras and uses them as the foundation of what he calls Madhyamaka, the middle way of looking. Madhyamaka here not being the middle way as used by Buddha, like the middle path as taught by Buddha between asceticism and indulgence. In Buddha's lifetime, it was sort of a big press that the harder the path to enlightenment is, the more direct it is. And so you'd have people totally anti-world and pro-aestheticism. Instead, Buddha tried that path for 6 years and said, no thanks, no thanks, doesn't work. And he went the other way toward indulgence. And he had grown up in a world of indulgence anyway, as an aristocratic warrior, an aristocratic boy and a warrior, one of the warrior classes. And so he'd grown up with great indulgence, you could say. And then he went into asceticism, and then he came out of it. And then he achieved his realization. And so in the early teaching, it was all really socially kind of, you say, contextualized to this thing, this sort of polarization in the India of his time, that if you're spiritual, you should really be fully spiritual. And the more, you could say, radical you were in your spirituality, the more heroic you were, the more admirable it was, the more desirable it was. So when Buddha first said, no, that doesn't work that way. We have to find a perfect balance between spiritual life and worldly life. And so his path became known as the middle path. But Nagarjuna comes about 450 years after Buddha. And Buddhism had been pretty strong throughout the entirety of India for much of that 450 years. So this sort of extremism, polarization, either super spiritual or super worldly, that kind of situation no longer existed. So Buddha's Madhyamaka is became known as Umetawa in Tibetan, looking from the center, holding a sense of self as being the center of the two sides of things. And it was no longer super asceticism or super indulgence, but rather between being and non-being, appearance and non-appearance. So these two terms, deeper nature of reality, Sundandapa, and completely deluded sense of reality, Kunzobdhamma. The deeper nature of truth, or the truth, the reality of ultimate significance, and truth of reality, which was completely distorted. And I like the word Tibetans use for that distorted as kunzo, completely false reality or completely false truth. And both the deeper reality of emptiness and the distorted reality of the manner in which things appear to a person with a distorted mind, with a distorting mind. Both are called reality, satya in Sanskrit, dhamma in Tibetan. And both satya and dhamma in both Sanskrit and Tibetan. Truth, dhamma could also not mean only reality, but truth. Therefore, we get the Bhavadhamma, the two levels of reality, or the two levels of truth, speaking about how one being the reality as we conventionally experience it. In other words, when we look at mountains and trees and rivers and friends and parents and kids and rock and roll bands and other such things, it's a completely distorted reality because the untrained person experiences it with the distorting effects of their own predispositions, karmic predispositions, educational predispositions, perceptual predispositions, emotional predispositions, and so forth. It's a reality, even though it's completely distorted. The way we experience it is untrue. So examples are given like the moon and water. There's something true about the moon and water. There's something real about the moon and water. There's also something untrue about the moon and water, unreal about the moon and water. And so this gave rise to two levels of truths. The other side is the moon and water does not exist in the water. We cannot find the moon and water. We can sift the moon and the water in which the moon appeared 1 million times, and we never find even one iota of the moon in water. So it appears to be there. It has some truth in that sense. And the way it appears is in a kind of a normal distortion. In other words, 10 people looking at the moon and water will all see the moon and water. A drunk person might even see the moon and water unless he's so drunk that he's what is the expression? Blind drunk. In which case, he'll just see some sort of shining. He's not sure quite what is shining. But everyone else, in some Buddhist text, we see the expression from a bug to a Buddha. We'll see it. So these levels of truth, you could say, two levels of truth, two levels of reality. Then in the Madhyamaka, we could say that the entire path from where we are now to enlightenment is really an exploration of these two levels of reality. It's looking at both the appearing nature of reality and the beyond appearance nature. Now, Buddha in the Prajnaparamita Sutras introduces the word zero, shunya, which often in English is translated as emptiness or empty. The ultimate level, the ordinary level of life appears with the hint of duality. It appears with a shadow of duality, a distinct sense of duality. Trees and mountains seem like two different unconnected things. Me, I seem like a different thing than a mountain or a tree. Rivers, skies, clouds, birds, all things seem disconnected from all other things, other than the fact that they're coexisting in the same moment of our own experience. The duality is the natural way, you could say, that we tend to see things because of the limitations of perceptual apparatus. So I often like to quote, I'm in Israel right now, so I like to quote a Jewish mathematician, Albert Einstein, who called this an optical illusion. Of course, he had read a lot about Buddhism because Germany was the first country in the West to write about Buddhist philosophy, Schopenhauer and these kind of people. And it became very popular with German intellectuals. Hey, no, your average German is more intellectual than your most educated Brit, Irish, or Scottish. Being Irish, I have to tell you that. But there are some exceptions, like me. I'm more intelligent than most Germans, but on average. And so Albert Einstein, sort of responding to this Buddhist way of talking about it, spoke about the optical illusion in which all things seem other than they actually are. All things seem interdependent, nothing seems interdependent. All things seem independent, nothing interdependent. So you could say one side of the teaching of the Heart Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, and Vimalakirti teaching is, on the one hand, everything appears with a coloring of duality, and people get caught up in that appearance. And as Chandrakirti puts it in the Madhyamaka Avatara, attractive things become objects of desire, repulsive things objects of rejection, and in between things objects of boredom. And the whole world is sort of polarized in these three ways. Whereas when we notice the interconnectedness of all things, we notice how nothing is separate. The separateness or the duality of things is completely an optical illusion. Now, in the Heart Diamond Sutra, many of the Prajnaparamita Sutras, Buddha gives long lists of examples, like the mirage, the hallucination, the dream, having an eye disease, like cataracts, and influences when you're on drugs or alcohol and so forth, the kind of ways things get distorted. Now, Nagarjuna steps outside or makes a difference between his understanding of this situation than was you could say, the norm with a lot of the so-called Hindu schools of the time. It's all things are like an illusion, yet they're true. Therefore, it's not all things are an illusion. All things are like an illusion. All things are like an hallucination. All things are not an hallucination. There's some sort of basis there for the distortion happening in the way it happens, you could say. So the moon and water, there is a moon, that's the reality factor. There is water, that's a reality factor. And light shines in the dark, and the water reflects like a mirror. So therefore, we get the moon and water. It has a reality factor. There's something true about it. We miss what is untrue about it when we fall into the appearing nature. Something like that is said. Therefore, in the development of the lineages coming down from Buddha through Nagarjuna, they develop kind of two trends in meditation, you could say, because of these two levels of reality, two levels of truth. And one is, we could say, is called the Zammotawa in Tibetan, the lineage of looking at the very depth of the emptiness and non-duality of things, resting the mind in the state and awareness, in the awareness of the beyond appearance. And on the other side is working with what appears, working with the appearance. And these two trainings, you could say, develop, come down through Buddha, through his Prajnaparamita teachings, developed by Nagarjuna, Aryadeva, Chandrakirti, Buddhapalita, Shantideva, Atisha, these great masters in Buddhist India. And from India come out and travel across the Silk Road to Mongolia. Many of the 10 kingdoms that today are all under China, in those early days were all independent countries. China today is in fact actually Mongolia, because it's the Manchu Mongols who conquered China and ruled it in 1911, and therefore when the Chinese overthrew the Manchu Mongols, their territory sort of became China, became recognized by the modern world as China. But went like that, and these three sutras, Heart Sutra, Diamond Sutra, Vimalakirti Sutra, became extremely popular throughout all those 24 kingdoms that were China in the old days. Of course, went down from there over to Korea, Japan.
Lama, it looks like we've lost you, so probably you don't hear those words, except maybe through the Dharmakaya or the space itself. Because everyone else on the screen is still moving, but Lamala's frozen, so let's give it maybe a moment.
Hotspot issue that Lamala has in.
Yeah, okay, and there he's gone out of the call. Let's see if he can reconnect, so maybe we'll just give it a few moments.
Yeah. Otherwise, we also can spend this few moments on reading some of the passages of Heart Sutra.
Yeah, we'll actually